July 14th, 1944, the hedgerows south of Saint-Lô, France. Oberfe writer Klaus Richter crouched beside his 10.5 cm light-field howitzer, hands trembling as he counted shells. 12 shells remaining for the entire gun crew. His battery commander had issued strict orders that morning. No fire missions without direct authorization. Every shell must be justified. Every target must be critical. The Americans were advancing, and Richter's battery, part of the 352nd Infantry Division's artillery regiment, had been firing constantly for 5 weeks, but the ammunition was gone. And then Richter saw it. Through his binoculars, across a meadow perhaps 400 meters distant, past the shattered remnants of an American position his unit had briefly captured 2 days earlier. Wooden crates. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. Stacked in neat rows that stretched along the tree line for what looked like half a kilometer. American ammunition. Just sitting there. Unguarded. Abandoned when the Americans had withdrawn under German counterattack. Richter called his battery commander, Hauptmann Werner Vogel. They needed to investigate. If those crates contained shells compatible with German guns, it could change everything. Within an hour, Richter and 5 men from his crew were moving carefully through the hedgerows toward the American supply dump. They expected mines. They expected booby traps. They found neither. The Americans had left in such haste that they had not destroyed anything. The crates were marked in English. Richter could read enough to understand. Shell HEM 100 5 mm. High explosive shells. American 10.5 cm ammunition. It might fit German guns. Many German artillery pieces in Normandy fired captured French 105 mm howitzers that used similar-sized ammunition. Even if these American shells did not fit Richter's gun perfectly, other German batteries might use them. But it was the quantity that stopped Richter cold. He began counting crates, 20 shells per crate based on the markings. He counted 100 crates in the first stack, 2,000 shells. He counted another stack, another 100 crates, another 2,000 shells. He kept counting. The dump stretched further than he had initially estimated, not 400 meters. More like 800 meters. Stack after stack after stack of wooden crates, all neatly organized with American efficiency. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Richter stopped counting after the first section. 5,000 shells, conservatively estimated. And the dump continued. He estimated at least 20,000 shells total, possibly 30,000. More ammunition in this one abandoned American dump than his entire artillery regiment had fired in the previous month. More ammunition than his regiment currently possessed. More ammunition than many German divisions had available. Hauptmann Vogel arrived with more men. They examined the ammunition carefully. The shells were indeed 105 mm, but American artillery used slightly different specifications than German or French guns. The shells might not fit German weapons without modification. Still, the sheer abundance was staggering. Vogel ordered his men to salvage what they could. They loaded crates onto a captured American truck, moving carefully to avoid American observation. Even if only 10% of these shells could be used, it would double the regiment's ammunition supply. But as they worked, Vogel made a comment that Richter would remember for the rest of his life. This is just one dump. The Americans left dozens of these across Normandy. They have so much ammunition they do not even bother to destroy it when they withdraw. It was true. German forces, advancing through areas the Americans had briefly abandoned, repeatedly found supply dumps intact, not because the Americans lacked demolitions or time, but because they had such abundance that individual dumps did not matter. Losing 20,000 shells meant nothing when millions more were being unloaded at the beaches daily. For Richter, who had spent the last month rationing 12 shells per day, the psychology was devastating. His battery could fight for perhaps 2 more days at current rates before running completely dry. This single abandoned American dump contained enough ammunition to sustain his battery for 2 years. The Americans had left it behind without a second thought. The discovery near Saint-Lô was not unique. Across Normandy, during the summer of 1944, German artillery crews encountered the same reality. American ammunition supplies exceeded anything in German experience. The abundance was not the result of a single large shipment or temporary logistical success. It was the product of industrial capacity operating at a scale Germany could no longer match. By early July 1944, Allied forces had landed more than 566,000 tons of supplies in Normandy. This figure included ammunition, food, fuel, equipment, and medical supplies for over 1 million troops. The ammunition component alone dwarfed German stockpiles. American artillery batteries in Normandy fired without restriction. A typical American field artillery battalion with 12 105mm howitzers could fire 500 rounds per day during active operations. That was over 40 shells per gun, per day, sustained indefinitely. Some battalions during heavy fighting fired over 1,000 rounds daily. The artillery supporting the American 2nd Infantry Division at Hill 192, near Saint-Lô, fired 20 separate time-on-target concentrations every night just to harass German positions and prevent sleep. Each time-on-target concentration involved multiple batteries firing simultaneously, expending hundreds of shells in seconds. This was routine. German artillery could not sustain such operations. Ammunition shortages had plagued the Wehrmacht since 1941 on the Eastern Front. By 1944 in Normandy, German artillery batteries typically received allocations of 10 to 20 shells per gun per day. During critical operations, this might increase to 50 shells per gun, but such expenditures were rare and required explicit authorization from division or corps headquarters. Hauptmann Vogel's battery, equipped with 6 105mm howitzers, received approximately 100 shells daily during the Normandy campaign. This equated to fewer than 17 shells per gun. Fire missions were planned carefully. Forward observers identified only the most critical targets. Battery commanders personally approved each mission. Ammunition conservation was paramount. The contrast became stark when German prisoners of war were interrogated by American intelligence. Captured German artillery officers repeatedly expressed shock at American ammunition abundance. One German battery commander captured near Caen in August 1944 told his interrogators that American artillery fired more shells in 1 hour than his battery had received in an entire week. He initially believed this was propaganda or exaggeration. Then he witnessed American artillery in action from his prisoner cage and realized it was simple fact. Another German officer, Oberleutnant Friedrich Kessler, captured at Mortain, provided detailed testimony. His battery had been part of the 7th Army's counterattack in early August. The attack failed, partly due to American air superiority, but primarily because German artillery could not suppress American positions. Kessler's 6 guns had 50 shells total for the entire operation. He fired all 50 shells in the first 2 hours. American counter-battery fire destroyed 4 of his 6 guns within 30 minutes of his first salvo. The Americans had located his battery using aerial observation, coordinated fire from multiple battalions, and delivered over 300 shells on his position in less than 5 minutes. The disparity was absolute. Kessler's battery had fired 50 shells total. The Americans had responded with 300 shells in a single barrage. When Kessler was captured hours later, he told his interrogators that German ammunition shortages made victory impossible. You cannot win artillery duels when the enemy fires 6 shells for every one you fire. You cannot suppress enemy infantry when you must ration ammunition. You cannot support your own infantry adequately when each shell must be justified to higher headquarters. The ammunition shortage was visible in multiple dimensions. First was quantity. German artillery simply did not have enough shells. Second was quality. By 1944, German ammunition production increasingly relied on forced labor. Prisoners of war and concentration camp inmates worked in German munitions factories under horrific conditions. Many sabotaged production when possible. German commanders noted increasing rates of duds, shells that failed to explode on impact. Some estimates suggested up to 30% of German shells fired in Normandy failed to detonate properly. American ammunition, produced in factories across the United States by civilian workers earning good wages, had minimal quality issues. American dud rates were typically below 5%. This meant not only did Americans have more shells, but a higher percentage of their shells worked correctly. Third was consistency. American ammunition was manufactured to precise specifications using standardized processes. This meant shells performed predictably. German ammunition by 1944 came from multiple sources. Different factories used different specifications. Quality varied wildly. Artillery crews could not rely on consistent performance. Some shells travelled further than others despite identical settings. Some exploded with more force. This inconsistency degraded accuracy and effectiveness. The industrial disparity underlying the ammunition shortage was profound. The United States produced approximately 41 million artillery shells of all calibers during World War II. This included millions of 105mm shells, over 5 million 155mm shells, plus shells for numerous other calibers. Germany produced significant quantities of artillery ammunition, but by 1944 production had declined drastically. Allied strategic bombing targeted German factories. Rail networks were destroyed, preventing distribution of whatever ammunition was produced. Raw material shortages limited production. In 1941, Germany could supply its artillery adequately. By 1943, ammunition shortages were common. By 1944, shortages were critical. American production continued increasing through 1945. Factories operated multiple shifts. Women entered the workforce in massive numbers. Standardization of ammunition types simplified production. The result was an industrial system capable of producing millions of shells monthly and delivering them anywhere needed globally. Lieutenant Hans Müller commanded a battery of 150mm howitzers attached to the Panzer Division during the Normandy campaign. His diary, recovered after his capture in August, provides detailed documentation of German ammunition problems. On June 26, Müller recorded receiving 60 shells for his 4 guns, 15 shells per gun. His division was preparing for a major counterattack near Villers-Bocage. Müller requested additional ammunition. His request was denied. Division artillery had no reserves to distribute. Müller's battery would attack with 15 shells per gun. The counterattack began on June 27th. Müller's battery fired all 60 shells in 45 minutes, supporting Panzer Lehr's armoured assault. American artillery responded immediately. Müller estimated at least 5 American battalions fired on his position. More than 500 shells landed in his battery area within 10 minutes. 2 of his 4 guns were destroyed. His ammunition was exhausted. Panzer Lehr's attack stalled. Müller recorded bitterly that American ammunition seemed unlimited. Every time German forces massed for attack, American artillery saturated the area. Every German position was engaged. Every movement was fired upon. The Americans seemed to have infinite shells. On July 2nd, Müller's battery received a resupply. 20 shells. 5 shells per gun for his remaining 2 operational howitzers. He was ordered to conserve ammunition and fire only at critical targets, with direct authorization from regiment. For the next 3 weeks, Müller's battery averaged 8 shells fired per day total, sometimes none. Müller watched American artillery through his binoculars. He observed American guns firing continuously. He counted shells. American batteries fired more in 1 hour than his battery received in 1 week. On July 25th, Operation Cobra began. American artillery fired the heaviest preparatory bombardment Müller had ever witnessed. He estimated thousands of guns firing simultaneously. The volume of fire was inconceivable. Shells fell continuously for 90 minutes. Müller had no ammunition to respond. His battery sat silent, watching the American bombardment pulverize German positions. 2 days later, American forces overran Müller's position. He was captured with his remaining crew. They had not fired a single shell that day. They had no ammunition to fire. The Americans had fired thousands of shells. Müller had 0. During interrogation, Müller was asked about German artillery capabilities. He answered honestly. German guns were excellent. German crews were well trained. German fire control was professional. But none of that mattered without ammunition. You cannot fight when you have no shells to fire. The Americans understood this from Müller's interrogation and hundreds of similar interviews. German artillery was not defeated by superior American tactics or better American guns. German artillery was defeated by American industrial capacity. The Americans could produce, transport, and distribute ammunition at scales Germany could not match. This advantage compounded over time. Each week, American stockpiles in Normandy grew larger. Each week, German stockpiles diminished further. By August, some German artillery batteries had ceased functioning entirely, not because the guns were destroyed, but because they had no ammunition. Crews sat beside fully operational howitzers, unable to fire because supply dumps were empty. The abandoned American ammunition dump that Richter discovered near Saint-Lô represented something more profound than simple abundance. It represented a fundamentally different approach to warfare. German military doctrine emphasized efficiency and conservation. Every shell mattered, every round had to be accounted for. Waste was unacceptable. This doctrine made sense when resources were limited. If you had only 100 shells, you had to use each shell wisely. But the doctrine broke down when facing an enemy with functionally unlimited resources. American doctrine emphasized overwhelming force and rapid expenditure. If you had doubt about a target, fire more shells. If you achieved your objective, fire additional shells for insurance. Waste some ammunition if it meant faster results and fewer casualties. This doctrine only worked with abundance. But America had abundance. The psychology of this disparity affected German morale profoundly. Soldiers who know the enemy has unlimited ammunition, while they have almost none, suffer inevitable conclusions. If the enemy can fire 100 shells for every shell you fire, you cannot win artillery duels. If you cannot win artillery duels, you cannot suppress enemy infantry. If you cannot suppress enemy infantry, your own infantry cannot advance. If your infantry cannot advance, you cannot attack successfully. If you cannot attack successfully, you can only defend. If you can only defend, and the enemy has unlimited ammunition to bombard your defensive positions, eventual defeat is certain. German soldiers in Normandy understood this logic. Many expressed fatalism by mid-July. Not because German soldiers lacked courage or skill, but because Germany lacked the industrial capacity to match American production. Oberfe writer Klaus Richter, who discovered the ammunition dump near Saint-Lô, survived the Normandy campaign. He was wounded by American artillery fire on August 3rd and evacuated to a field hospital behind German lines. 2 weeks later, the hospital was overrun by American forces. Richter became a prisoner of war. He was transported to a camp in England, then later to the United States. In a letter written to his family in 1946 after his release, Richter described his experience in Normandy. He focused particularly on the ammunition dump. That dump, with 20,000 shells or more, abandoned without care by the Americans, represented everything wrong with Germany's strategic position. Germany could not afford to abandon such quantities. Every shell was precious. But the Americans abandoned ammunition routinely because they had so much that individual dumps did not matter. Richter wrote that from the moment he saw that dump, he knew Germany would lose the war. Not someday, not eventually. Soon. Within months. The industrial disparity was too great. Germany could not compete. The ammunition crisis German artillery faced in Normandy was not sudden. It was the culmination of systemic failures that had been developing since 1941. Understanding why German artillery crews encountered American abundance in 1944 requires examining how Germany's logistical system collapsed under the strain of total war. In September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, the Wehrmacht possessed adequate ammunition stockpiles. German factories produced sufficient quantities to support operations. The Polish campaign consumed relatively little ammunition. The fighting lasted only 5 weeks. German artillery fired sparingly. Stockpiles remained healthy. The campaign in France in May and June 1940 also consumed manageable quantities of ammunition. The rapid collapse of French defences meant limited artillery expenditure. Germany's ammunition production could sustain the operational tempo, but the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 changed everything. Operation Barbarossa required artillery support on a scale Germany had never attempted. The Eastern Front stretched thousands of kilometers. Hundreds of German divisions advanced simultaneously. Each division included artillery regiments firing daily. The ammunition consumption was enormous. German logistics struggled immediately. The Soviet rail network used a different gauge than European railways. German supply trains could not use Soviet tracks without modification. Converting Soviet railways to European gauge took time and labor. Meanwhile, German trucks carried supplies from railheads to frontline units. The distances were vast. Trucks broke down. Roads were poor, especially during spring thaw and autumn rains. Mud consumed vehicles. By late 1941, German ammunition supplies were strained. Artillery batteries received reduced allocations. Forward units sometimes operated for days without resupply. The situation worsened in 1942. German offensives towards Stalingrad and the Caucasus stretched supply lines further. Ammunition consumption continued at high rates. Production struggled to keep pace. Soviet resistance was fierce. Every kilometer gained required artillery support. Every defensive position required bombardment. The shells were expended faster than German factories could replace them. Unteroffizier Paul Schmidt served in an artillery battery supporting the 6th Army at Stalingrad. His letters home, preserved by his family, document the deteriorating ammunition situation. In August 1942, Schmidt's battery received adequate ammunition, 50 shells per gun weekly, enough to support operations. By September, allocations dropped to 30 shells per gun weekly. By October, 20 shells per gun. In November, when Soviet forces encircled the 6th Army, Schmidt's battery had 15 shells, remaining total. Not per gun, total, for 6 guns. The guns sat silent while Soviet artillery bombarded German positions continuously. Schmidt and his crew were captured when the 6th Army surrendered in February 1943. He spent 10 years in Soviet captivity. The Stalingrad disaster cost Germany hundreds of thousands of soldiers and enormous quantities of equipment. But the strategic impact went beyond battlefield losses. German ammunition production capacity was permanently degraded. Allied strategic bombing of German industrial centers increased throughout 1943. American and British bombers struck factories, rail yards, and industrial infrastructure. Production declined. What ammunition was produced often could not be transported to fighting units because railways were destroyed. By 1944, the ammunition shortage was systemic. Every front reported critical shortages. Italy, the Eastern Front, and increasingly the Western Front after D-Day all competed for limited supplies. There was never enough to meet requirements. Priorities had to be established. Some units received allocations, while others went without. The Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, occurred at the worst possible moment for German logistics. The Wehrmacht was already overstretched. Ammunition supplies were critically low. And now German forces in France faced a new threat that consumed resources at unprecedented rates. The initial German response to the invasion was hampered by ammunition shortages from the first day. Coastal defense batteries fired until their ready ammunition was exhausted, then fell silent because resupply could not reach them. Field artillery battalions supporting counterattacks fired their allocations within hours, then waited days for additional shells. The American and British forces, by contrast, landed with enormous quantities of ammunition. The pre-invasion bombardment by Allied naval forces and air forces had been the heaviest in history. Then, once troops were ashore, artillery battalions began, landing with their full ammunition loadouts. American divisional artillery battalions came ashore with basic loads of ammunition. Additional ammunition ships followed immediately. By D-Day +2, American artillery in Normandy had more ammunition stockpiled than many German corps possessed on the entire Western Front. Oberleutnant Werner Hauptmann commanded a battery of 105mm howitzers with the 716th Infantry Division, defending near Carentan. His battery fired continuously on D-Day and D-Day +1. By June 8th, his ammunition was exhausted. He requested resupply. Division artillery informed him that no ammunition was available. The nearest ammunition dump was over 100 kilometers away. Transportation was limited. Allied air superiority made daylight movement impossible. Trucks attempting to move ammunition at night were frequently destroyed by Allied fighter bombers equipped with radar and night vision equipment. Hartmann's battery received 12 shells on June 10th, 4 days after requesting resupply, 12 shells total, for 6 guns, 2 shells per gun. He fired those shells immediately. Then his battery sat silent for another 6 days before the next resupply arrived. Hartmann recorded in his diary that American artillery fired continuously. He could hear American guns firing day and night. The Americans never stopped. German guns fired occasionally, briefly, then fell silent again. The psychological impact was severe. The ammunition disparity manifested in casualty rates. German soldiers in Normandy reported that artillery fire caused the majority of casualties. British studies estimated that 70% of 21st Army Group infantry casualties through July 1944 were caused by German mortars and artillery. But German casualties from Allied artillery were even higher. American after-action reports indicate artillery fire caused approximately 60 to 70% of German casualties in Normandy. The absolute numbers tell the story. American artillery fired approximately 1.25 million shells during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 and January 1945. That was one battle, 2 months. In Normandy, from June through August 1944, American artillery fired millions of shells total. German artillery fired a fraction of that quantity. The exact figures are difficult to establish because German records were incomplete, but estimates suggest German artillery in Normandy fired perhaps 10 to 20% of the volume that American artillery fired. This firepower disparity meant American infantry advancing under artillery support faced significantly less resistance than German infantry. When American units attacked German positions, American artillery fired preparatory bombardments that often lasted 30 to 60 minutes. Hundreds of guns firing thousands of shells on target areas. German defenses were suppressed or destroyed before American infantry arrived. When German units attempted counterattacks, German artillery might fire a brief preparation, 20 to 30 shells from a single battery, if ammunition was available at all. Often German infantry attacked without artillery support because guns had no shells to fire. American defensive artillery then engaged German attacks with overwhelming firepower. The results were predictable. Major Karl-Heinz Becker commanded a battalion in the 352nd Infantry Division, defending near Omaha Beach. His battalion counterattacked American positions on June 7th near Vierville. The attack was ordered by regimental headquarters despite Becker's protests that his battalion lacked adequate artillery support. The supporting artillery battery had 15 shells available. The attack proceeded anyway. Becker's battalion advanced in broad daylight across open fields. American artillery engaged immediately. Becker later estimated at least 6 American batteries fired on his battalion. Over 300 shells landed in less than 10 minutes. His battalion lost 40% casualties before reaching the American positions. The attack failed. The survivors withdrew under continued artillery fire. Becker's battalion lost over 200 men. The American casualties from the German attack were minimal because the attack never reached American lines. Artillery stopped the attack before close combat occurred. Becker survived and was captured in July. During interrogation, he described the attack and the artillery disparity. He stated bluntly that German infantry could not advance against American positions when American artillery was functioning. The firepower was overwhelming. German casualties from artillery made attacks impossible, but German artillery could not suppress American positions because German ammunition was insufficient. The tactical situation was hopeless. Becker's assessment was shared by numerous German officers captured in Normandy. Major Helmut Rittgen of the Panzer Division, captured in August, provided similar testimony. German armored units could not maneuver effectively under American artillery fire. Every concentration of German tanks drew immediate American artillery response. Tanks were destroyed or damaged. Supporting infantry took heavy casualties. Attacks stalled, and German artillery could not counter battery effectively because German ammunition was limited. American artillery operated with impunity. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The abandoned ammunition dumps German forces encountered in Normandy were symptoms of American logistical abundance. The dump Klaus Richter discovered near Saint-Lô with 20,000 shells was not unusual. Similar dumps existed across Normandy. Some were deliberately established as supply points. Others were temporary stockpiles created when American units displaced forward and left excess ammunition behind. The Americans practiced what they called tonnage excess. Better to have too much ammunition than too little. Supply officers were encouraged to overstock forward dumps. If units advanced faster than anticipated, excess ammunition was left behind. New dumps were established further forward. The abandoned dumps would be recovered eventually by supply units following behind the advance. Or not. Individual dumps did not matter when total stockpiles were measured in hundreds of thousands of tons. German doctrine could not comprehend this approach. German logistics emphasized precise calculations. Units received exactly what they needed based on planned operations. Excess was waste. Abandoned supply dumps were catastrophic failures. But the Americans operated differently. Abundance created flexibility. Units could change plans without worrying about ammunition. Forward, observers could call for fire freely. Artillery battalions could fire extensively without fear of running out. The system worked because American production and transportation capacity sustained it. By July 1944, American supply dumps in Normandy held over 600,000 tons of material. This included ammunition, fuel, food, spare parts, medical supplies, and everything else needed to sustain over 1 million troops. The ammunition component alone was staggering. Enough shells stockpiled to sustain operations for months, even if no additional ammunition arrived from England or the United States. German supply dumps in Normandy by July held perhaps 20,000 tons of all supplies combined across the entire front. This included ammunition for all German units, defending from Cherbourg to Caen. The disparity was absolute. The Americans had 30 times more supplies available. When German units captured American supply dumps, they found abundance beyond their experience. Hauptmann Franz Weber's infantry company captured an American supply point near Hill 192 in mid-July during a brief counterattack. The supply point was a small forward dump, not even a major depot. Weber's men found ammunition, food, medical supplies, cigarettes, and equipment. The food was packaged in individual rations. Each American soldier received 3 meals daily in waterproof containers. The quality was remarkable. Real meat, chocolate, coffee, fruit. German rations by July 1944 were meager. Bread, minimal meat, thin soup when field kitchens functioned. Weber's men ate American rations and were astonished. This was what the enemy ate routinely. The ammunition at the captured supply point included crates of rifle ammunition, machine gun ammunition, mortar shells, and artillery shells, all neatly organized and marked. Weber examined the artillery ammunition. 100 5mm shells, unusable by German guns. But the quantity was remarkable. Several hundred shells in a small forward supply point that probably supported a single American battalion. Weber's entire regiment had fewer shells available. Weber reported the capture to battalion headquarters. He was ordered to destroy everything his company could not carry. American forces would recapture the position soon. The supplies could not be left intact. Weber's men took food and cigarettes. Then they destroyed the ammunition and remaining supplies. Weber later reflected that the captured supply point, tiny by American standards, contained more provisions than his company had seen in a month, and the Americans would simply bring more. They had unlimited supplies. Germany could not compete. The industrial basis for American abundance was visible to German prisoners who were transported to the United States. Thousands of German POWs from Normandy were shipped across the Atlantic to camps in America. They traveled through American ports, past American factories, through American cities. They witnessed industrial capacity firsthand. Gefreiter Otto Schneider was captured near Cherbourg in June and sent to a camp in Texas. He later wrote about the journey. The ship that transported him was loaded with German prisoners in the hold, but the upper decks carried cargo bound for Europe, ammunition, vehicles, food, all moving toward the fighting while prisoners moved the opposite direction. Schneider thought about the symbolism. When Schneider arrived in New York Harbor, he saw the skyline. Massive buildings, thriving industry, no bomb damage. The city was untouched by war. Meanwhile, German cities were being destroyed by Allied bombing. In Texas, Schneider's camp was near an airfield and factory complex. He watched American aircraft land and take off constantly. Bombers, transport planes, fighters, all new. All part of production that continued despite the war being thousands of miles away. Schneider realized that Germany could never match this industrial capacity. The factories producing American ammunition were safe. No German bombers could reach them. The production continued uninterrupted. Meanwhile, German factories were being systematically destroyed. Production declined monthly. By 1945, Schneider understood German production would collapse entirely. The war was decided not by battlefield courage, but by industrial output, and Germany had lost that competition. Feldwebel Hans Gruber, captured at Falaise in August, was sent to a camp in Pennsylvania. Near the camp was a munitions plant producing artillery shells. Gruber could see the factory from the camp. Trucks arrived constantly, delivering raw materials. Trains departed, loaded with finished ammunition. The factory operated 24 hours daily. 3 shifts, thousands of workers, all producing shells that would be fired against German forces in Europe. Gruber calculated roughly. If this one factory produced 1,000 shells daily, that was 30,000 shells monthly, 360,000 shells yearly. And this was one factory among hundreds producing ammunition across the United States. The scale was incomprehensible. German production, even at peak capacity, could not match a fraction of American output. And by 1944, German production was far below peak capacity. The ammunition disparity extended beyond simple quantity, to include technological advantages. American proximity fuses, known as VT fuses, were introduced in Normandy in July 1944 for use against V-1 flying bombs. The fuses proved devastatingly effective. By December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, VT fuses were authorized for use against ground targets. The effect on German forces was catastrophic. VT fuses used miniature radar to detect proximity to the ground or other objects, then detonated the shell at optimal height. This created airbursts that were far more lethal than conventional fuses. Conventional time fuses required calculating the precise time to target, then setting the fuse manually. Variables like wind, temperature, and barrel wear affected flight time. Even small errors meant shells exploding too high or burying in the ground before detonation. VT fuses eliminated these variables. Every shell detonated at optimal height, regardless of conditions. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Koch survived VT fuse barrages during the Ardennes offensive in December 1944. He described the experience in post-war interviews. Conventional artillery gave warnings. The first shells would land, then soldiers would seek cover. Foxholes and depressions provided protection from horizontal fragments. But VT fuse shells exploded overhead. The fragments came down vertically. Foxholes offered no protection unless they had overhead cover. Koch stated that his unit suffered 50% casualties in a single VT fuse barrage. Men in foxholes who should have been protected were killed by fragments falling from above. The psychological impact was severe. If foxholes offered no protection, there was nowhere safe. German soldiers refused to leave deep bunkers because movement in the open meant certain death if American artillery engaged. Some units experienced near mutiny when ordered to attack. The men knew that American artillery with VT fuses would destroy them before they reached enemy positions. The technological gap paralleled the production gap. Germany had developed some advanced munitions, including infrared night vision equipment and early guided missiles, but production quantities were minimal. Advanced weapons remained experimental or limited issue. American advanced weapons, including VT fuses and radar-guided systems, were produced in quantities sufficient to impact operations significantly. VT fuses by the end of 1944 were standard issue for American artillery, millions produced. Every American artillery battalion had access. The technological advantage became a practical advantage, because American industrial capacity could mass-produce advanced systems. German advanced weapons often remained curiosities because production capacity could not scale to battlefield-relevant numbers. The ammunition crisis reached its conclusion in the final months of the war. By March 1945, many German artillery units had ceased functioning. Guns sat silent without ammunition. Crews remained with their weapons, but there were no shells to fire. Supply dumps were empty. Transportation networks were destroyed. Even where ammunition existed, it could not reach frontline units. American and British forces advancing through Germany in April encountered German artillery abandoned, intact. Guns in perfect condition, just no ammunition. Crews had disabled the weapons and surrendered or fled. Fighting without ammunition was impossible. The industrial war was over. Germany had lost comprehensively. Oberst Heinrich Müller commanded an artillery regiment on the Western Front in the final weeks of the war. His diary entries from April 1945 document the collapse. April 2nd, regiment received no ammunition resupply. All batteries report 0 shells available. April 5th, American forces advancing. Regiment cannot engage. No ammunition. Recommend withdrawal. April 8th, withdrawal approved. Guns will be destroyed. Cannot transport without fuel. Crews will retreat on foot. April 12th. Regiment has ceased to exist as fighting unit. Men are dispersing. War is over for us. Müller's experience was replicated across every German front. Artillery units that had fought for years simply stopped functioning because ammunition was gone. The men had training, skill, and courage. The guns were operational. But without shells, artillery batteries were useless. American artillery, meanwhile, continued firing without restriction until Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. The last American artillery shells fired in Europe were celebratory rounds marking the German surrender. After years of sustained bombardment, American ammunition stocks in Europe were still substantial. They had never run low. Production had always exceeded consumption. The human stories behind the ammunition disparity reveal the psychological toll on German soldiers who faced American firepower in Normandy. These were not merely statistics about shell production or logistical capacity. They were men who understood that their side was being outproduced, outsupplied, and ultimately defeated by an enemy whose industrial capacity they could not match. Gefreiter Ernst Wagner served in an infantry regiment attached to the 7th Army, defending the Cotentin Peninsula. His letters home, written between June and July 1944 before his death near Saint-Lô, provide remarkable insight into German soldier psychology. On June 15th, Wagner wrote to his mother describing the American artillery. They fire continuously. Day and night, the shells fall. Our own artillery responds occasionally, then falls silent again. We know they have no ammunition. The Americans have unlimited shells. They waste ammunition on single targets that we would ignore to conserve rounds. They fire 10 shells, where we would fire 1. And they have tens of thousands more shells waiting. Wagner's June 22nd letter was more pessimistic. I have accepted that we cannot win. The Americans have too much of everything. Yesterday I watched American trucks bringing ammunition forward, dozens of trucks in a convoy, each carrying tons of shells. Our own supply wagons are drawn by horses and bring minimal quantities. The Americans bring more ammunition in one convoy than our entire division receives in a week. How can we win against such abundance? Wagner was killed on July 7th by American artillery fire. He was 21 years old. His letters survived, because they were recovered from his body by American troops and eventually returned to his family after the war through Red Cross channels. Unteroffizier Paul Richter, not related to Klaus Richter mentioned earlier, served in a Nebelwerfer rocket artillery unit. Nebelwerfers were multi-barreled rocket launchers that fired salvos of rockets producing psychological effects through sound and smoke. They were effective weapons when properly supplied. But by July 1944, Richter's unit had minimal rockets available. He recorded in his diary that his unit fired one salvo on July 10th, then waited 11 days before receiving additional rockets. During those 11 days, American artillery fired constantly on German positions. Richter's unit could not respond. They sat in their positions, waiting for resupply that never came in adequate quantities. On July 21st, Richter's unit received 36 rockets, enough for one full salvo from their launchers. They fired, immediately at American assembly areas. The rockets impacted, causing casualties and disruption. Within minutes, American counter-battery fire engaged Richter's position. He estimated at least 100 American shells landed in his battery area over 15 minutes. 2 launchers were destroyed, 4 men killed, 8 wounded. Richter wrote, "We fired 36 rockets. They responded with 100 shells. We cannot fight such odds. For every rocket we fire, they fire 3 shells. And they have thousands of shells. We have no more rockets. We are finished." Richter's unit was overrun by American forces on July 25th during Operation Cobra. He survived and was captured. In his interrogation, he provided detailed information about Nebelwerfer operations and the ammunition shortage. He stated that Nebelwerfer units were effective when supplied, but by late July, ammunition was critically short. Units fired one salvo, then withdrew immediately because counter-battery fire arrived within minutes. Without ammunition for additional salvos, remaining in position was suicide. Richter spent the rest of the war in a POW camp in England. The psychological impact of the ammunition disparity extended beyond frontline soldiers to artillery crews themselves. These were men trained in a technical specialty, proud of their skills, frustrated by their inability to perform their mission effectively. Wachtmeister Georg Hartmann served as a gun layer, the crewman responsible for aiming the howitzer precisely. His skill allowed accurate fire with minimal ammunition expenditure, but skill became irrelevant when ammunition was unavailable. Hartmann's battery received sporadic resupply through July. Some days they received 20 shells, other days 0. Fire missions were approved or denied based on ammunition availability, not tactical necessity. Hartmann recorded that his battery sat silent while American infantry attacked German positions 300 meters away. They had no ammunition to support the defense. They watched German infantry fight without artillery support and get overrun because higher headquarters had no shells to distribute. On August 2nd, Hartmann's battery received a resupply convoy that had survived American air attacks. 40 shells arrived. The battery commander decided to fire all 40 shells immediately before the next American air attack destroyed them. They fired on pre-selected targets without forward observer adjustment. All 40 shells expended in 20 minutes. Then silence again. Hartmann wrote, "What is the purpose? We fire 40 shells and accomplish nothing because we cannot observe effects or adjust fire. The Americans fire 400 shells on single targets with observers directing every impact. Our 40 shells are wasted, but we have no choice. Fire now or lose the shells to air attack later." The frustration of skilled artillerymen unable to perform their mission effectively corroded morale. These men understood artillery tactics and fire control. They knew how artillery should be employed. But without ammunition, their knowledge was useless. Hauptmann's battery was destroyed by American artillery on August 7th. He was severely wounded and evacuated. He survived the war but lost his left leg. In post-war interviews, he stated that German artillery in Normandy was defeated by logistics, not by American tactical superiority. German guns were good, German crews were skilled. But without ammunition, skill meant nothing. The logistics officers responsible for distributing scarce ammunition faced impossible decisions. Hauptmann Werner Vogel, the battery commander mentioned earlier, kept detailed records of ammunition distribution in his unit. His records show the steady decline of available shells. June 10th, 200 shells in battery reserves. June 17th, 120 shells. June 24th, 80 shells. July 1st, 40 shells. July 8th, 20 shells. July 15th, 6 shells. July 22nd, 0 shells. Vogel recorded that each decline required rationing decisions. Which targets deserved engagement, which fire missions would be denied. When 0 shells remained, what was the battery's purpose? Vogel wrote on July 23rd. My battery has 6 operational guns and trained crews. We have no ammunition. We are artillery that cannot fire. I have requested resupply daily for 2 weeks. Regiment informs me that no ammunition is available at division level. Corps has minimal stocks reserved for critical operations. Our operation is not critical. We will remain silent until resupply arrives. If resupply arrives, Vogel's battery received 12 shells on July 27th. He fired all 12 shells that day, supporting a regimental counterattack that failed. No additional shells arrived before American forces overran his position on August 4th. Vogel and his crew destroyed their guns and retreated on foot. Captured on August 6th. Vogel's detailed records were recovered by American intelligence and provided valuable insight into German ammunition problems. The records showed that a German artillery battery in Normandy operated with less ammunition in an entire month than an American battery fired in a single day. The ammunition shortage created a cascading effect on German tactical capabilities. Infantry units attacking without adequate artillery support suffered higher casualties and achieved fewer objectives. This forced commanders to be more cautious, limiting offensive operations. Defensive operations also suffered because German artillery could not suppress American attacks effectively. American infantry advanced with confidence, knowing their artillery support was substantial. German infantry defended with increasing pessimism, knowing their artillery could provide minimal support. Major Rudolf Becker commanded an infantry battalion in the 919th Grenadier Regiment. His battalion defended positions south of Kärnten through June and July. Becker's diary documents the declining effectiveness of German artillery support. June 12th. Requested artillery support for defense. Battery fired 60 shells over 30 minutes. Effective. American attack repulsed. June 19th. Requested artillery support. Battery fired 30 shells over 15 minutes. Partially effective. American attack delayed but not stopped. June 26th. Requested artillery support. Battery fired 12 shells. Ineffective. American attack succeeded. Position lost. Becker wrote on June 27th, Our artillery is finished. They have no ammunition to support us adequately. When we request fire, they respond with minimal shells that accomplish little. Meanwhile, American artillery fires hundreds of shells on our positions before their infantry attacks. We cannot stop their attacks because our positions are destroyed by artillery before their infantry arrives. Our own artillery cannot suppress their attacks because we have no shells. The situation is impossible. Becker's battalion was destroyed during Operation Cobra on July 26th. He was captured with fewer than 50 men from his original battalion of over 700. During interrogation, he stated that American artillery fire caused approximately 70% of his battalion's casualties. German artillery supporting his battalion fired negligible quantities because of ammunition shortages. The asymmetry was total. The German soldiers who survived Normandy and were transported to POW camps carried with them psychological scars from the ammunition disparity. Many later reflected that the experience of facing American artillery with unlimited ammunition, while their own artillery sat silent, was demoralizing beyond description. These were professional soldiers who understood military operations. They could assess tactical situations realistically, and they understood that Germany could not win when the enemy had 10 times or 20 times or 50 times more ammunition available. Feldwebel Martin Weber was captured in August near Argentan during the Falaise Pocket Battle. He spent 18 months in a POW camp in England, then 2 years in a camp in the United States before repatriation in 1948. In a 1965 interview for a German documentary about the war, Weber reflected on his experience in Normandy. They produced more ammunition than we could ever use if we had unlimited time. They fired more shells in 1 hour than my division fired in 1 week. That was the reality. Courage did not matter. Tactical skill did not matter. Training did not matter. When the enemy has unlimited ammunition and you have almost none, you lose. That is simple mathematics. Weber's assessment was shared by many German veterans. The Normandy campaign became understood as the moment when Germany's industrial inferiority became undeniably clear. The Eastern Front had been brutal, but Soviet logistics were often crude and inefficient. German soldiers could rationalize that better training and equipment balanced Soviet numerical superiority. But in Normandy, German soldiers faced an enemy with superior training and superior equipment and unlimited supplies. The rationalization collapsed. Germany could not win. The only question was how long defeat would take. Klaus Richter, whose discovery of the American ammunition dump opened this story, survived the war. He was released from POW camp in 1947 and returned to Germany. He lived until 1988. In the 1970s, he was interviewed by historians researching German artillery operations in Normandy. Richter described the ammunition dump in detail, still vivid decades later. I counted thousands of crates, perhaps 20,000 shells, abandoned by the Americans because they had so much that one dump did not matter. My battery had 12 shells. We were rationing ammunition desperately, and the Americans left 20,000 shells abandoned in a field. That moment, I knew we were finished. Not defeated yet, but the defeat was inevitable. You cannot win when the enemy has so much abundance that they abandon enormous quantities without concern. Richter's observation captured the fundamental reality. The ammunition disparity was not primarily about German incompetence or American genius. It was about industrial capacity. The United States in 1944 possessed industrial capacity far exceeding Germany's. American factories produced ammunition in quantities sufficient to supply forces fighting across the Pacific and in Europe simultaneously. German factories struggled to supply forces on a single front. The outcome was predetermined by industrial mathematics. The legacy of the ammunition disparity extended beyond World War II. Post-war military analysts studying the Normandy campaign identified ammunition supply as one of the most critical factors in Allied victory. Soviet military theorists studying the campaign concluded that modern warfare required industrial capacity to sustain ammunition consumption at previously unimaginable rates. The side with superior industrial capacity would win regardless of tactical skill. NATO military planning during the Cold War emphasized stockpiling massive ammunition reserves to ensure sustainability in a potential war with the Soviet Union. The lesson from Normandy was clear. Ammunition wins wars. Tactical brilliance and soldier courage matter, but without ammunition to fire, artillery is useless. Without artillery support, infantry cannot fight effectively. Without effective infantry, armies cannot win. The German soldiers who faced American artillery in Normandy understood this lesson through bitter experience. They were skilled, courageous, and professional. They were also doomed. The ammunition shortage made defeat certain. The only variable was timing. The abandoned American ammunition dumps scattered across Normandy were monuments to industrial capacity. Each dump represented abundance beyond German comprehension. Each dump demonstrated that America could produce, transport, and distribute supplies at scales Germany could no longer match. The war was decided not by battlefield heroics, but by factory output, and Germany had lost that competition. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.